Well, hello everybody, my name is Roger and welcome to my channel, Rogers Reads. So today I'm doing my January month-end wrap-up, which is part 2 of all the books that I've read in the month of January. And for the second half of the month, I ended up reading 8 books. So the first book that I read is entitled Winter of the Witch by Katherine Arden. So this is the third and final volume in the Winter Night trilogy, and I was so sad to see this series end. I really ended up loving it. So this book picks up right where the events in the Girl in the Tower left off, in the aftermath of a deadly fire that torched Moscow, and immediately we hit the ground running. Vasya's enemy, Father Konstantin Nikonovich, has vowed vengeance on the girl and incites the townspeople into a murderous rage, convincing them that Vasya is a witch. So they capture her, put her in the cage, and attempt to burn her to death as a witch. But she manages to escape and is on the run, fleeing for her life. So now she undertakes a perilous journey for her survival and the survival of her people, traveling in a strange and somewhat haunting otherworldly realm where nothing or nobody is as they seem. And of course, along the way, she encounters all manner of mythical creatures during her travels. She also discovers long buried secrets about her family history, her bloodline, and her legacy, helping her to finally understand who she really is. But no matter what obstacles are placed in front of Vasya, she finds a way to overcome them, intent on her main goals: to search out the only creature who can help her to save her cousin's kingdom from the rapidly approaching Tartar armies, and to assist her in restoring balance after an old and deadly enemy resurfaces and who is intent on destroying Moscow. She also vows to help the charity coexist with humans, with charity being the blanket term for the guardian spirits than creatures of Russian folklore. But in order to accomplish her goals, she first has to make a drastic and inescapable decision, a decision that she's not quite sure is the correct one. So it was so much fun seeing Vasilisa Petrovna in this third and final book. She is fierce, committed and unapologetic, indeed a force to be reckoned with, and can definitely hold her own against anyone who wishes to cause her harm. She also really comes into her own in this story, as well as finally discovers the power, the true power that resides within her. The Winter of the Witch was really bewitching and immersive, with its larger-than-life dynamic characters, action-packed plot, and lush narrative. You know, I'm often somewhat leery of reading the final book in a trilogy because oftentimes I end up sadly disappointed. But not this time. In the stunning conclusion, everything is resolved. All loose ends are tied up. So I'd have to say that the Winter Night trilogy is now amongst my most beloved series, one that I will no doubt reread in the future. So the next book that I read this month was entitled Cub by Paul Coccia. So Cub is a short LGBTQ young adult novel that follows a 17-year-old chubby young man named Theo who loves to bake and is very good at it. Now, knowing that Theo is an excellent baker and deserves recognition, his best friend Di enters him into a cooking competition sponsored by a new trendy restaurant in Toronto called Heat. So the contest is to last for several weeks, with one contestant being eliminated after each weekly round. And the rest of the story revolves around this competition and Theo's interaction with the head celebrity chef named KCC and the other contestants. So as Theo begins to win rounds, he attracts the attention and admiration of not only the audience who is watching the competition, but also of KCC, who makes it quite clear to Theo that he's interested in much more than Theo's baking abilities. He lets Theo know that if Theo does what KCC wants, in and out of the kitchen, nudge nudge wink wink, that he will help Theo to launch his career. So now Theo has to decide just how far he's willing to go to achieve his dreams. Now we need to keep in mind here that KCC is much older than Theo. I got the impression that he was in his late 20s or early 30s, though I don't think his age was ever actually mentioned. And Theo is still a minor at 17 years old. So the scene where KC rather aggressively comes on to Theo felt super predatory and cringy to me, which I imagine is what the author intended. Now that being said, I do feel that the author handled the situation extremely well and did an excellent job of portraying the range of mixed emotions that Theo experienced whenever KCC would hit on him. So, here we have, on the one hand, Theo, a pudgy 17-year-old boy who has managed to attract the sexual attention of a gorgeous celebrity chef who is one of his idols, in fact. But on the other hand, Theo feels that things are moving way too quickly and the situation somehow feels wrong to him. The fact that the man is considerably older than Theo is, which could be adding to that sense of wrongness. So I thought it was absolutely riveting being in Theo's head as he tried to sort this all out. So though this is a short book, I thought it was an incredibly well-told story. I love seeing Theo's growth throughout the book as he moved from someone with low self-esteem to someone quite confident and self-assured. It was lovely seeing Theo beam as he gained more and more admiration from the audience during the competition. Because at the beginning of the book, Theo was quite shy and terrified of being put in the spotlight. But by the end of the novel, he was confident, a master of his little world, and he completed the required baking trials with finesse. So though a couple of scenes were kind of unsettling, the story invites readers to ask themselves whether, when placed in a similar situation, they would make the same choice as Theo. Though the novella was short, I think it was like around 146 pages or so, it definitely packed a punch. I will definitely be on the lookout for more books by this author. So the next book that I read in January was entitled The Past and Other Things That Should Stay Buried by Shaun David Hutchinson. So, given that I adore Shaun David Hutchinson's work, I was super excited when I heard that he was releasing a new novel. And I was doubly excited when I heard that it was to be about the dead who won't stay buried. So, The Past and Other Things That Should Stay Buried takes place over the course of 2 days and follows a young man named Dino whose parents own a funeral home. As it turns out, Dino's ex-friend July dies suddenly, and Dino is trying to work through his grief at her passing. He always believed that eventually they would find their way back to each other and renew their friendship, but now it was too late for that to ever happen. And so we begin to see Dino's regret and all those words between them that now will never be said. So Dino, he's alone in the basement with July's body, working on her makeup in preparation for her upcoming funeral, his way of saying a final goodbye to his friend, when suddenly she comes back to life. Well, not to life exactly. She's conscious, sentient, but her body is still dead. No heartbeat, no breathing. And given that she's just undergone an extensive autopsy, it's unlikely that any of her organs are working either. So what follows is Dino and July's attempt to figure out what in the hell is going on with her, all the while rehashing their former friendship, each blaming the other for its end. There's also kind of a race against the clock here, because as Dino and July soon discover, they do not have the luxury of time to slowly figure out what's happening with July. Because though July's death may have ended, her decomposition has not, which means that she's not smelling quite as fresh as she once did. So, when people around them begin commenting on the offensive odor, they both realize that their time is limited. Moreover, it turns out that July's resurrection had a ripple effect throughout the world that has affected the natural course of life and death. I thought that this was a lovely, heartfelt novel about two teens who were given a little extra time to resolve the unfinished business that was left between them. I love the fact that it was up to the reader to determine just whose unfinished business it was that caused July's return. The quirky and crazy plot of this story was kept steady by the realism and the truth of the situation, that is, of the grief of losing a friend with so much still left unsaid between the two of you. So as usual, Shaun David Hutchinson did not disappoint, and I ended up loving this tender story, which held me in rapt attention from start to finish. It was a story with emotional depth and plenty of heart, and I became so emotionally invested that by the end of the book, I felt as though I were saying goodbye to close friends. So I really recommend this book, and it's due out at the beginning of February, I do believe. So the next book they read this month was entitled Rabi and Matthew by L.A. Witt. So Rabi and Matthew is a gay romance story which the blurb describes as a queer retelling of Romeo and Juliet, except no one has to bury their gays, and follows Rabi Hashmi and Matthew Swain, who meet one night at a party and end up falling in love. Simple enough story. Well, not really. What makes this story interesting is a decades-old rivalry between the two families as their two fathers run against each other in the election for a seat in Congress. So what we have here with these two is Democrat versus Republican, Muslim versus Christian, and years of mistrust and hatred between the two families. So Rabi and Matthew know that their love will not be without its challenges, and that falling in love with each other in the middle of a war that has the potential of turning bloody is probably not the wisest thing. But they cannot resist the attraction and the feelings that grow between them, so they decide to take a chance. They end up meeting in secret, often heading out of town in order to lower the risk of running into someone who could report back to their families. But little did they know, however, that the pot had reached its boiling point, and hatred, along with escalating racial tensions, now threatened everything that they held dear, and not everyone may end up with a happily ever after. So I really love the entire premise of a queer retelling of Romeo and Juliet, with a white Christian boy from a racist Republican family falling in love with a Muslim Pakistani boy from a Democrat family, with both families obsessed with their hatred for the other. I was also impressed with the clever parallels with Romeo and Juliet, and I thought the author did an excellent job of doing that. I also give the author extra points for not stereotyping our main characters as either Romeo or Juliet, for which I was grateful. I also thought that their whirlwind romance was tender and sweet, with there being a powerful chemistry between them. And there are also so many interesting themes that ran through this novel. There was racism, hatred, gun violence, violence in general, xenophobia, particularly Islamophobia, homophobia, and politics, to name a few. So that being said, the story had plenty of edge-of-your-seat, nail-biting drama that gripped me and held me until the emotional ending. Now, this is kind of book that takes your heart, tosses it in the blender, and then slowly puts it back together at the end. Though I will say the journey was exhilarating. Now, it's important to remember that this novel, though it may not seem like it at times, is a romance story, and it is not a tragedy like Romeo and Juliet. Now, that's not to say that horrible things don't happen, because they do. But ultimately, this is a love story, and though the characters don't end up perhaps with an ideal happily ever after, the ending is perfect in light of the events that take place in the book. So in this way, it was a satisfying conclusion. I thought the novel was well crafted and deeply engaging, with even a twist or two to keep things interesting. So I ended up quite liking the story. So the next book I read was entitled Becoming, written by Michelle Obama. So I listened to this on Audible, and what a treat it was, because Michelle Obama herself, the author, read the book, and it certainly made it a lot more special. So Becoming is the former First Lady's memoir, in which she chronicles those experiences that helped her become the person she is now, both her successes and her disappointments. So we move through her childhood in the south side of Chicago, her time at Princeton, to the moment when she met Barack Obama, her attempts at juggling motherhood with a career, and ultimately the time that she spent living and raising two daughters in the White House. So she spent a considerable amount of time on her childhood, and at some point I thought perhaps some of this maybe could have been cut out. But as I learned later on in the book, it's all relevant to where her story was heading and important to understanding who she is. Though political issues do creep in, Becoming is not a book about politics, but rather it's an open and honest account by a resilient and admirable woman who ends up being thrust into a position that she really wasn't all that prepared for, given that she's not particularly a fan of politics. Now, I promised myself that I wouldn't delve into politics while talking about this book, but I will say that I've always loved and respected Michelle Obama, and this book made me love her and respect her even more. I loved watching her overcome the obstacles that were placed in her path, and how she reinvented herself over and over to fit into each new role that she was expected to fill, always initially rather unsure of her footing. So determined to be more than simply the wife of the president, she really cleared her own unique path in the White House by tearing down numerous walls and became truly an important woman in American society. So given that I do plan on doing a full-on review of this on this channel, I'm not going to talk too much more about it here, except to say that it was phenomenal and possibly one of the most interesting autobiographies I've ever read. So the next book that I read was entitled, I'd Rather Be Reading, The Delights and Dilemmas of the Reading Life, and this is written by Anne Bogel, who is the webmistress over at the Modern Mrs. Darcy blog. And this book is all about reading and books, something that many of us bookish types would enjoy. I know I did. So it's kind of a love letter to readers, and in it she talks about bookstores, libraries, being book bossy, organizing your bookshelves, bookseller dreams, the dreams that many of us have about working in a bookstore or working in a library, rereading books, recommending books, various bookworm problems, and so much more. So this book does an excellent job of igniting the nostalgia of our favorite childhood books, or even old favorites as adults. It reminded me of the hours that I would spend poring over shelves of my library, checking out 20 or even 30 books at a time. The book is written in a friendly, chatty format. It feels as though you're having tea and conversation with an old friend. So though it's kind of a preaching to the choir type of book, because no doubt most of the people reading this are bibliophiles who do not need to be convinced of the importance of reading, it's still an enjoyable little read. I enjoy reading a book about books from someone else's perspective. I also felt that she nicely captured what it feels like to be a book lover, someone who's passionate about reading. I appreciate the fact that this was a book about reading aimed at readers. You know, many of us often don't have people with whom we can discuss our love for books, hence the reason why many of us create booktube channels. So it was nice to read something that was written especially for us. So in this way, the book is totally relatable. Now, though I did enjoy all the essays, I found them definitely worth the read, I felt that they could have been a little longer and maybe fleshed out a little bit better. I think perhaps the book was a little bit too breezy in some places and could have done with a little more depth. What I mean is, a lot of what was mentioned here was something that no doubt many of us have already thought about on our own. But still, this is quite an enjoyable read, fun and entertaining, and a book that you can no doubt turn to over and over again. So the next book that I read is a graphic novel, and it's entitled Anne Frank's Diary. This is the only graphic novelization of Anne Frank's diary that I'm aware of, and the breathtaking, expressive artwork in this adaptation by David Polonsky, and adapted by Ari Fullman, as well as actual excerpts from her diary, really brings this literary classic to life while maintaining its original integrity. Let me just show you some of the illustrations. The illustrations are absolutely amazing in this book and very, very evocative. There's so much humor and emotion in these illustrations, and they really bring Anne to life as someone that we can relate to. We really get a true sense of Anne as a frightened, confused, and somewhat saucy teenage girl. And I felt that the images and text captured Anne Frank's diary beautifully and emotionally. So this was an interesting new perspective to an old classic that really resonated with me, especially the ingenious manner in which the artist rendered Anne's emotions, thoughts, and observations through the vivid illustrations. So all in all, this is a beautiful, moving adaptation with stunning illustrations that, while keeping to the spirit, I guess, of the original material, helps us to see this young girl in a whole different light. The editor and the artist took Anne Frank's diary and transformed it into a delicately told story with stunning pictures and heartfelt scenes. You know, I can't begin to imagine what a daunting project this must have turned out to be, but in my opinion it was a very successful one, exquisitely rendered in pen and ink, and I am so glad that I came across this book. Definitely worth the read. A couple more of the powerful illustrations. So yeah, Anne Frank's Diary. So the second book that I read this month was entitled The Silent Patient, written by Alex Michaelides. This is actually a Book of the Month Club selection this month, actually. And I don't even think it's out officially yet, but it'll be out soon. So A Silent Patient follows a painter named Alicia Berenson, I do believe, who has just murdered her husband. She has shot him, Gabriel, 5 times in the face, and she never speaks another word. Nothing. She gives no explanation for what she did and does nothing to defend herself. So we fast forward 6 years to where we then meet Theo Faber, a criminal psychotherapist who has waited a long time for the opportunity to work with Alicia. He is determined to get her to talk and to solve the mystery of why she shot her husband, with only one clue: an unsettling self-portrait that she painted after the murder, which she entitled Alcestis, which I do believe is named after a Greek tragedy. Now I have to say that I found Alicia to be one of the most compelling, enigmatic, and complex characters that I've come across. As Theo begins interviewing Alicia, delving deeper into her psyche through therapy and studying entries in her diary, the diary that she was keeping before she committed the murder, or before her husband's murder, he ends up going down quite a dark and twisty path, especially once he begins to get a clearer image of who she was, her history, and of the events that preceded the murder. Naturally, not all is as it seems. And then there's the completely insane and unexpected twist that comes at the end. Well, it was nothing short of amazing, and I did not see it coming at all. I was shocked. Shocked, I tell you, shocked. But yeah, the ending was definitely a favorite. All in all, this is a meticulously well-crafted, captivating, and clever psychological thriller that kept my eyes glued to the page with its plethora of twists, turns, and surprises. Now, this one really blew me away, and I ended up loving it. Now, I actually heard rumors that already this is going to be turned into a movie, and good God, I hope so, because I would definitely go and see it. And I'll be doing a full-on review of this on this channel in the coming days, so if you want to know a little bit more about it, stay tuned for that. So the next book that I read this month was entitled Perfect Match. Perfect Match follows Sven, a lumberjack who has not found his Mr. Right, which concerns his family because they don't want him to be lonely. So they decide to take matters into their own hands and find him someone through an online site called Perfect Match. The result is the arrival of a somewhat effeminate young city boy named Jaden, who is pretty much out of his comfort zone, being surrounded by a group of burly, gruff lumberjacks. Now, Sven and Jaden couldn't be more different, but there does seem to be an attraction between them, a chemistry of sorts. But we soon learn that the company Perfect Match is not what it seems, and Jaden is actually trying to deceive and con Sven, though deep down he is really a decent guy. But the kicker is that Jaden has actually fallen for Sven and is developing quite strong feelings for the man. Moreover, Jaden has some dark secrets that he does not want anyone to find out, most of all Sven. So naturally, all sorts of wacky hijinks ensue. So this was a light-hearted and fun gay romance with family shenanigans, sweet and endearing characters, and two opposites who find one another. It's a feel-good story that only has a teensy amount of angst in it, and it was fun to see the main characters slowly growing to trust and care for each other. So all in all, this was a truly pleasant and solid reading experience. And I actually read an ebook version of this book, so I don't have the physical copy. Actually, I read a lot of ebooks this month, come to think of it. So, yeah, so that's the last book that I read in the month of January. Have you read any of these? What did you think? Let me know in the comments. So that'll about do it for this time. As always, I thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support. And if you like this video, I'd appreciate it if you click the like button below, as it really helps my channel out. So I will talk to you in the next video. Roger and out.